Welcome to another episode of Thommo's Tin Shed, and we are busy. We've got a lot of little things to do on this episode. It's not going to be one particular thing, it's going to be a handful of small elements that have to be done to get this car to its next stage. Now, I want to take the body off so we can prep for paint. But before we can do that, I've got one more important task to do, and that is to set the steering box in place. I'll put the starter motor back in now so I know what clearances are. I've got to cut some holes somewhere in here. I'm going to have a steering wheel somewhere in here, and once that steering section is in place, then I can do a template for the dash panel. I'm going to do a steel dash panel, but I need to know where the steering column goes to do that, so that is still coming as well. Now, the bomber seats still have to be made, but we're going to do that on the body when it's off the car, just to make it a bit easier working height. We're going to put it on another stand, and then we can just literally build the seats where it is, and I can jump in and out the body. I will actually be sitting in this car today for the first time, just to see if my big fat ass fits in here, so that'll be interesting. I have not, to this moment, even sat in this thing, so to set the steering wheel up, I need to make sure I'm in the car and centered. So let's get on with the episode. Don't forget, hit like, subscribe, hit those notifications, and stay with us to the very end. The journey is really cooking up now. It's going to be rumbling along. We've got a couple more episodes up our sleeve, and then we're off to Perco. So let's get it done. G'day folks, I'm Thommo. Hey, you're there, I'm here, I'm doing stuff, you're watching, perfect. So this is the steering column I'm using, or steering box. This is the outer shroud, or the column tube, which clamps around that and covers over that. Now up in this end here there is a spigot bush which supports this part of the shaft, and the column through there. So we've got a bit of adjustment in this. We can actually shorten the length of the shaft if we need to, and we shorten this end and we can make a shorter version of that. As long as that supporting bearing is supporting the top of the primary shaft, we're all good. This is a little steering box here, up close, put a little GM one, little Chevy box. I'm guessing out a little Chevy 4 or something like that. It only has a two bolt mounting section, and more importantly the pitman arm turns in the right direction. So this section through here is going to mount into here. I have to fabricate a plate off of that and obviously give it enough support so it doesn't move around. But the critical line here is where it comes up into the bulkhead. That angle going through the bulkhead is relative to where the steering wheel is going to be positioned, and we obviously have to make sure that that tube, the column tube, goes centered through there, so if these pedals are out, they're not going to touch the column at any point. And the other factor is the clearance on the starter motor. We've got to make sure that that tube doesn't start the motor, because this motor's going to be rocking when it's running, so we need at least half-inch clearance on the starter motor just so that it doesn't push on the steering box. So mount down here, hang up through there. I'm kind of hoping the hole will end up being around here so I don't mess up my beautiful bead roll, so I'm thinking it's going to end around here. We'll go around the other side here. We put this bit of flat bar in to support that panel which fits in there, so we really want to keep that there. I'm kind of thinking we're going to put a hole in here, but here's the thing. Because it's fixed at the other end, it's a tube, the alignment where the steering wheel goes is pretty important. So we kind of need to make sure that it comes through in the right alignment so I can have the steering wheel centered, and obviously need to make sure we've got clearance on the dash as well. Kind of important, because if the angle's wrong, it could be out here, it could be right up here. We've got to make sure it's in the center driving position. Like I said, the length this way can be adjusted accordingly, but we want to make sure that the center position is right. Once we get that sitting in place, we've got the dash, it's going to bolt to there. We actually put a bracket, support, a bit of tubing across here, which the steering column will attach to. That'll be the top end support bracket, and that'll be hidden behind the dash. Dash is going to go through there. So once that steering column's in place, we can put that support bracket through, secure that, then it's not going to move up this way, it's going to be nice and supported down through there. And then we'll know exactly where we can put our dash, because we're going to create the template for the dash once that steering column is fixed in place. And then of course we can adjust the length of our steering wheel, and I can get my butt in there and see how it looks. So we've got a little bit of hole, so I've got to work out the angle and where it's going to fall. We know it has to be in that center line because that's obviously between the two pedals, and we're going to have to get that clearance through here to miss that, bolt onto that to get the angle right on there. So a little bit of complication, but it needs to be done. So that's first up. So let's get on with that. So we've got the bracket made. There's a bit of a relief. I've just cut a relief. It's really thick material and my bench press didn't want to run it. So what's going to happen is it's going to get tacked on right there and there, across there. We'll leave it fairly flat. Then we're going to bend it up on the tack till we get the angle we want. Once we know what that angle is there, we'll be able to bend that piece down and touch the chassis and weld it. So that'll be our bracket form there. We've only got the single hole at the moment because we're not too sure about the rotation. Once we get that finalised, we'll set the second hole in place. Now I've had to put a little bit of a relief in the chassis to account for the hole, the head of the bolt on the steering box. That's going to sit right there, that's the bracket, that's ready to go. Now we come up to this section through here. Now this line here represents the frame. There's a bit of flat bar on the back side of the supporting frame. I kind of want to leave that in place. And these two lines are obviously where my step relief is. So this is our window of opportunity here, and I'm pretty sure by sitting in the car it's going to get us close. So I'm going to run a hole saw and open it just slightly larger than the tube that we need, and then we're going to try to slide this steering box in and bolt it in and see how it looks. So you can see we've got the steering box bolted in, plates just sitting there floating. Got really good clearance through from the starter motor. I can put my whole hand through there, so that's pretty cool. But what I've discovered is to get this sitting nicely above, it's actually sitting too high in the car. So I'm actually going to have to cut a cathedral cut. I'm going to just basically slice through my flat bar section and cut that through. Don't have a choice really, because I'm going to need to lower this down to get the steering wheel angle right. So she's getting there, but we'll have to pull this out, cut a piece away, bolt it back in, and then we can start working out what we're going to do with it. But it definitely needs to go down to get the steering wheel in the right spot, and it's just a little high. So when you drop a steering wheel on it, it's just way too high out the car. It needs to come down, and when I'm sitting in the car it doesn't feel right. So we're going to slice and dice this piece, and then we can bring this down and then get the angle right from there. So that's what we're going to do next. Righto, so the steering box is now mounted in place. We've got the bracket there. We've just a bit of finishing off to do. I need to drill that hole in there. See, there's a bit of a hole in there. And I'm going to put a captive nut on that. We'll do that when we flip the chassis. By the way, I'm going to fill inside through here. Just going to give that a bit of a dress to make it look pretty. So the two bolts are fixtures in there. It looks like it's hanging down here, but when we come back over here, we can see we've got that support bracket, and that's going to be held up there. Probably like an exhaust U-bolt bracket or something to that effect. We're just going to drill two holes in the underside of that angle line and hold that in place, so that's all good. So that's looking pretty great. So steering box pretty much done. We're going to pull that out in a minute because we obviously want to get that body off today. So we'll come back to the steering, the pitman arm, when we've got the front end all in place, and we'll have to obviously modify and make the drag link and the steering. But that's another day. So what we do need to do now is, while this is in place, because we wanted to know where the steering column finished, we're going to create a template. Now I'm only going to create half a template because this is the only important part. We can use the other half to flip the other side. They're symmetrical anyway. So I'm just going to create a straw board template now while the body's still on, so I can confirm where that steering column goes, and then I can make the dash at a later date, but I need to do that right now. Once that's done, we can pull the steering box out and think about pulling this body off. G'day folks, start another day here at Thommo's Tin Shed, and you can see something's happened. The chassis is now accessible to do the driveline, and of course back over here the body is off. Now I was going to show a bit of footage of us taking the body off and stuff, but we got excited. I had some people here. I had Woody from Cool Junk, I had Tony, my photographer, and then I had my daughter Marnie, and it was just the moment was right. We just lifted it off and set it up. So you didn't get to see the body come off, but that's okay. It's not that really important. All you need to know is that we can now start paint prepping the body shell, literally upside down at the moment, so I can do all the underside, seal up the inside, put a coat of colour on it, and it's going to get flipped back over the right way up, and we can final finish that body. So we got that exactly where we need to be right now. We also have the chassis here, which is missing some important bits. So we're going to be concentrating on getting the driveline into this while we've got access. We also have to do a brake assembly, which we're going to be doing, but I can't do the brake assembly until the rear transmission cross members back in place. And then through here, we're going to be dropping some bracketry for fuel tank and battery assembly, and then down the inside of the chassis rail, we're going to put a series of fixture points for fuel line, brake lines, and so on and so forth. So we've got a little bit to go on this one. Once we've got all the bits and pieces, the final fabrication on this chassis, we're going to strip everything out of it. We're going to turn upside down. We're going to do all the final finish welds underneath it. Then it's getting its final coat of paint. From that point forward, anything that goes back into the car is a final fit. So we're at that sort of crossroads now with the build. We've got to pull it apart to put it back together again, if that makes sense. So it's all part of the journey, of course. But here's where we're at today. So I'm going to be concentrating on finishing a few things. I've got a steering box bracket I want to finish up through there. And then I'm going to want to try to get the gearbox assembly mounted in place, and or the rear suspension. I've got that diff housing there at the moment, centers out, axles are out. So it'd be a good time to sort of drop that housing in there and just sort of see how it fits in there. So we're probably looking at that as well. So like I said, this episode is going to be bits and pieces of everything. This is that cornerstone moment, so you'll probably see little bits of time-lapse stuff of me painting the body, getting some primer and doing the seal work on that, getting it ready to go, finishing off the bracketry, little bits and pieces. So this is the sort of weird part where you have to do these, this almost feels backwards moments to go forward. So bear with us. I'm going to get on with it right now. I've had my coffee, I'm all good to go, I'm charged, and let's get on with this thing. Okay, so we've finished off the steering box mount. We've all blended that in. It's all part and parcel of the chassis now. Now I do still have to put a captive nut behind there, but we'll do that when the chassis goes up. So, but for now, that is the steering box mount completed. Now we'll move down to here. Now what I've got to do through here is I've got to put a piece of tube between the chassis rails right at the peak of the arch. And then we're going to put some angle iron strips through here. So in the back here, it's going to be the fuel tank, and then the battery, or battery fuel tank, haven't quite decided yet. But we know that this is where the bulkhead is, and that's where the cabin is. So we're literally going to find the center of that arch, put a piece of tube evenly across that, and then we'll start working out what bits go here. So let's get that bit of tube in first, and then we'll work out how we're going to fit things in. Okay, so as you can see, we've got our fuel cell and our battery location. Completed the mounts for that. Now obviously there's a battery clamp to go in, and we need to fabricate some straps to secure the tank, stop that from flopping around. So a bit of flat bar work to do that, which we'll do next, and that'll secure the tank in place. What I also need to do for the battery is something that's often missed but pretty important. I'm going to be welding a 3/8 UNC bolt right here, which will be what we call a grounding tower or an earth tower. So our earth to our battery will ground common to the chassis. And then we're going to be putting a series of bolts down the inside of that chassis rail on the right hand side, which is to secure the fuel line and battery cable. But when we get to the engine bay side, we're also going to put another earth post in there. Again, welded directly to the chassis, so that it's a true ground. Then your negative or your earth is true to the body, and then we take that to the motor via an earth strap. So one more bolt here, a couple of straps here, then that part's finished. Then all that's left for it in the upright position, as I said, will be a series of bolts, which I'll probably do 16" on center, and then that literally is just to give me something to affix the chassis work, and I'll probably need to put a hole saw down there, the engine mount down through there, so I can run that through. But other than that, we're just about ready to strip the chassis out. A bit more on that. Then I think I'm going to look at how this leaf spring setup sits in. That's my next job, but I wanted to get that buttoned up, because once that's done, those components can be moved out the way and they're sorted. So we've done the battery mount, support brace, fuel tank mount, and all the fixtures and straps are there. We just need to clean up this back coaming. Going to take a few dangerous bits of broken bolts off and dress this all the way through to where the cab sits. And then we're going to concentrate on putting in the leaf spring next. Get the rear leaf springs mounted in. We'll clean up the diff housing and hang the diff housing in there, so we get a bit of an idea and a picture of where the wheelbase is going to be. And then we're going to move forward down the line. Now I went to do the gearbox mount up, but I realised that the gearbox I've got has had a broken lug, one of the fixture points. So I'm going to have to sort that out before we can start hanging that in place. So I need a gearbox that's going to fit up. So that's on my list to do. So I still need to get the gearbox in place, because I still need to put the gearbox rear cross member in. So there's a bit of a hold up there. So I'm just going to finish out all of this back section right through here first, get that into a ready to go status. Then we'll move down the line. Motor comes out, sort out that other stuff. But next on the list is we're going to be putting fixture points all the way down here, every 16" on center, and they're going to basically be fixture points all the way along through here. And that's just to secure the fuel line, brake line, and battery cable, which has to come from the rear to the engine bay. So that's the end of this day. We'll have to pick it up tomorrow. In the last episode I mentioned about dry firing a motor, and this is the 216 that we're going to be using. Now technically this is a running motor, but I haven't had it running. It's missing a few things. It's missing a fuel pump, and the carby's a bit wobbly, and we're only just starting to find the pieces we need for the distributor. But irrespective of what motor you've got that you want to try fire, you only need the motor to be sitting on this little holding trailer. This is on wheels so I can move around the shop, but it just basically supports the whole motor in its space. And then it's a little service arm that I created. It's just a simple one. And what it has, what's missing here is the oil pressure gauge that's going in later. This is your on-off switch, and when you power it up, you'll have a little green light to confirm that, because you need to know that the power is on and sending 12 volts to the coil. So you want to know when the coil's on. And then this is just a momentary start switch, so starter. Now we always run this isolated from the ignition system. The reason being is that you can use this to crank the motor over to an oil pressure test or compression test, or you want to see where the oil pressure build is in it, or you just want to free spin it for timing, all that sort of stuff. So in your static prep, you always make sure that your starter switch is an isolated power to the switch back to the starter motor. You just want to free crank it when you're ready. Now the ignition switch comes off. This is where the main battery terminal is going to connect to the starter motor, and that is what's going to put your power feed back up into here. Behind, you can't see it, behind here is a circuit breaker, 30 amp circuit breaker, so all power goes into that, and then your power supply for your switches comes off the other side of that. Very simple basic rig, but if you get a dead short or something fails, the circuit breaker will cut all power, so that's not so bad. And then the ignition side literally is going to be feeding this green wire, which will feed your coil. So when the ignition is on, your coil is hot. Coil is hot means you've got spark ready to go. So that's what that one's there for. And the blue cable is just literally the starter wire from the momentary. So when you're doing these dry fire in the shop, what you want to do is confirm the first three things. Before you try kick it in the guts and run it, you want to know one thing. Firstly, does the motor free spin? Does it turn over by hand, and will it turn over with the starter motor? You have to be able to crank the motor over and get it turning. If it free spins, first job out the gate. Secondly, before you continue to free spin that, you want to make sure that you have oil pressure in the system. Now these old motors here have an oil bypass line on the other side of the motor that goes and feeds oil to the valve gear. So we're going to tee in an oil pressure gauge, which will be sitting right here, but we'll put a capillary line to the back of that, so we can actually gauge what oil pressure is coming off the main pump. Now these old girls only deliver oil pressure to the main journals on the crankshaft, and there's a feed up to the rocket gear. The actual big end bearings are a scavenge system. So you're looking for oil pressure to make sure that obviously the bearings aren't going to pick up. And then third and final, you want to see if it's got compression. So we take the spark plugs out using the momentary switch and a compression gauge. We go through and test the compression on each of those cylinders. What we're looking for is a fairly even run, and these cylinders should be, within 10% of each other, plus or minus. And if there's a stuck valve or there's a burnt valve, you're going to have a cylinder that won't make pressure. So you can diagnose issues later, but what that tells you is that you have oil pressure, motor spins, you have compression on the pots. Those are the three main things you need to start this. Once you get to that point, you're going to find a fuel pump to deliver fuel to the carby, and then you've got to complete your sparky set coil pack in the coil to the distributor, spark plug leads, and then you're ready to go. Then you can set the timing and actually dry fire. And we are literally going to fire this thing up on that stand right there. And that'll be later down the road, but I just wanted to put you through and show you exactly what we do to dry fire these motors. And anyone can do this, whether it's be Chev V8 or a 216 Chevrolet 6 or an old red motor or grey motor, or whatever it is that you're into. You can literally dry fire a second-hand motor in the shed just like this. And when it's ready to go, I'll pick it up again and I'll show you the startup. All right, back at the start of another day and we're back in the shed. The sun's out, but that also means that the neighbours are out. That's okay, we'll work around that, it's only a tractor. So, we're going to do the fixture points first up. We're going to weld them into the inside of the chassis rail straight up. We're going to be using these. Simple 3/8 UNC by 1 inch bolt. It just gives you, well, firstly the correct thread for the car, and secondly just enough clearance to put a stack some P clamps for our fuel lines and our brake lines and stuff. Just secure everything, keep safe. Keep the brake line, the fuel line and the battery cable separated from each other, while still secured safely down the inside of the chassis rail. But you could just chuck them in there and just weld them where they land. Here's Thommo's tip to start the day. What you want to do first of all is either get your linear belt or your sander and sand them marks off. See, we've got the old mark. Sand them off nice and flat. Gives you a flat surface to work from. There's a reason why we do this. Secondly, you want to get yourself a little bit of 3/4 mask tape. Now this doesn't have to be tight. What you want to do is just quickly lace that on like that. That's it. That's to protect the thread when you're welding. You know, a weld splatter hitting the weld, plus also you can also do the paint out and the prime up if you want to weld that's still there. So that's literally just so that you don't get weld splatter on your thread. Now how's the tech tip of today is this here. Super glue. Doesn't matter what brand it is. Whatever your brand is. This happens to be out the back of my work car. It's just a Worth product. Really good. But it's just super glue. And what you're going to do is you're literally going to super glue these to the chassis. Exactly where you know what your centers are, you know what they're on. You just do a little dab of super glue it in place. What happens is they're now secured. They just hang there. And then you can go along with your welder and you weld them all up. You don't have to worry about falling over. You don't have to try to get your glove in there. You know, nothing worse than having a welding glove and trying to hold that and then just get it welding. Way too hard. Super glue. That's the key. So when it comes to the fixture bolts and little brackets you just want to hold in place, in the industry, I work in the mining industry and we super glue everything. Tech tip from Thommo. Okay, let's talk about locking diffs. Now, back in the good old days of Speedway, where we used to race at places like Forestville Speedway and Wattle Grove, used to get old stockies out of EKs, FBs, FEFCs, EHs even, and we didn't have quick change diffs or any limited slip diffs in those things. We used to lock our own. Now this is just an early Holden diff, right? I'll see how we used to do it. Bit of 1/4 inch, 25 1.5 inch long. You whack it down inside the spider gears and you literally weld them up. You corner tacks to hold that plate in, and then you just flow as much weld as you can get into those spider gears, and what you're literally doing is locking the spider gears so both axles work at the same time. That is what we refer to in our world as a CIG locker. And I'm literally going to get some nice heat into that, going to weld it up, and that's done. The only thing I suggest is put a little bit of CRC or WD-40 on your gears, on your bearings, just in case. Get a bit of weld splatter in there, but generally speaking, we just bored it in there with a bit of MIG. In those days, it would have been stick. Get it all locked up, put it back in the diff, both axles turn. Just to show you the final product, folks, CIG diff locker. You see, we just bore a whole heap of heat into that, and you weld all those spider sets together with that little bit of plate which ties them all in. Now, that's never going to break, trust me. You're probably more likely to snap the end off an axle before you'll break that. But that's how we do it in the old days, mates. Old Speedway days, lock diff. You can get into your spider gear set, you just weld them in with a bit of plate. And that is Locker Diff 101, CIG locker. We're going to be using the original hanger brackets that fit in there. Now this hole here is not 1/16 inch, but the pins I'm using in my leaf spring is 1/2 inch. So we're going to modify these, plus the actual hangers themselves were so flogged out and worn, they were just terrible. So we're going to go to the workbench and I'll show you what I've done with these, because we need to solve this problem before we can hang the spring to set the spring hanger. So let's go to the workbench and I'll explain what we have to do to fix this problem first before we can swing that leaf spring. Righto, don't mind my voice folks, I've got a bit of a cold going on, but we'll keep moving. So this is the hanger setup I was telling you. These are all the stages. So what we've got here is the original one, and we just plug welded the holes. Beauty about the forge stuff is you can just go at it. So nice and heat. By the time I finished welding these things were glowing red and all plugged up. And you just leave them on the bench, let them anneal down. You don't quench them, you don't dip them. The shock of a cold quenching can sometimes crystallize the weld. So you just want to weld them up nice and hot and then just let them cool down on their own natural course. So that's the weld up stage. Then we clean them off and we get them all nice and clean, put them on the linisher, get them all flat again. But we want to make sure we know where the center is. So we find a washer, as dag as that sounds, we find a washer that fits pretty much on point. And we mark our centers and we center punch that so we know that's true center. So cleaned up, marked up, then we go to drill stage. Now, like I was saying, the chassis hanger is 9/16 of an inch, so we've had to drill 9/16 of an inch there, but the spring eye is only 1/2 inch. But by having the opportunity to redress these hangers, we've been able to re-drill those holes to an accurate hole size, 9/16, 1/2 inch. And then we finally put them into etch primer, and this is the stage where we hang them on the chassis ready for paint. So that's the 4 stages: weld up, set and mark, drill, paint. Make sure that when you do these, you see it's a little bit of light around there, let me see it there. Just countersink the hole, take the sharp edge off the hole. It stops the shafts from getting worn out or prematurely cut into because of the side load. These will actually have a bit of side load when the chassis is on suspension, so make sure you deburr or countersink, just a light countersink on each of the holes. But yeah, there you go folks. Welding, set marking, drilling, painting. That's the stage. Now I've got to do these ones to get them to look like that. Got a contradiction in terms here in WA. We've got sun out and it's still raining. Go figure. So we've just been through the process of rectifying our hanger brackets. Now at the point where we're going to put the hanger brackets in place, and then we have to hang the leaf spring, and here's the next bit of fabrication work we've got to do. So we're using 35 Chev hangers. The original 28s were too light on and they just looked horrible. So I had these with the leaf spring set that I got, so I've given it a bit of a birthday, bit of a haircut. And we're going to be welding in this situation. So what we've got to do is we've got to get the leaf spring in, clamp that up in place, get the angle of the hangers just right, and then once we've done that, we can weld in this hanger bracket. We also need to do the other side as well. Now when those 2 leaf spring assemblies are welded in, we can then slide the diff housing in, we can put the diff center in, and the gearbox is in now. That leaves us with the tail shaft shortening. We're going to have to shorten the tail shaft to fit this driveline. But that's something we're going to show you how to do. Now there's few tutorials out there how to do it, but I'll show you my way. Good, bad or otherwise, this is how I've been doing it for years. And so today we're going to get rear leaf spring assemblies in, gearbox is sorted, diff center's been locked up and welded, I showed you that one. We're going to shorten the tail shaft, that means the driveline will be complete. Now we do have to create a cross member for the gearbox rear extension section. We'll do that towards the end of the day. But once we've got that, that means that the chassis itself is ready to get stripped out, turned upside down, quick bit of welding, dressing, and then we're paint time. So we're really getting close to getting this chassis off this jig and up onto some stands. So pushing on really quick now. Once we get this chassis onto the stands and it's all painted up, it is literally finish fit. And I'm looking forward to that, because that means we're getting pointy. Now I've got the wheels, tyres are in, rims are in, tubes are coming. We're going to get the wheels, tyres and tubes put together hopefully this week.
and that means that we can start looking to put this thing on its wheels, which we get somewhere close to a car. But we've still got a few things to do. For now, let's get this rear section done, and then when we get that done, we'll move on to the tail shaft. When the tail shaft is done, we'll do this cross member. We do have a brake bracket to do, but I'll do that during the week and I can pick that up. I'll show you what we're doing with it, but in the meantime, let's get this done. Here's one of those moments in the workshop, happens all the time, but realisation that I was going to hang the diff in and do the tail shaft while it's still on jig, which isn't possible. Turns out when I put the leaf spring in, the leaf spring hangs lower than the jig frame, which means I can't mount the diff. I can't mount the diff, I can't do the tail shaft. And I've also noticed that the gearbox is sitting a little bit high. The angle of attack is not okay. I'm going to have to adjust that too. That's pretty straightforward. I'm just going to make some adapter brackets on the rear engine mounts and get that to come down a little bit more, but luckily we didn't start the cross member first because that's changed as well. But what I'm going to have to do right now is shuffle the workshop. I'm going to have to relocate this into the centre bay because that's where my lifting jig is. I'm going to have to take the body and put it into this bay. We need it in here anyway because we're going to be doing chair fabrication, dash fabrication on the next episode, so I really want that into the bay. So I'm just going to have to take an hour off of fabricating and reset this workshop. So I'm just going to do that right now. When I get that all set up and back, and I've got this chassis sitting on a set of stands on the ground, we might be in a better chance of sorting out what we've got to do. In the meantime, I'll stop the talking and I'll get on with the working and I'll get this workshop turned around. Righto folks, after a bit of time we've got ourselves a workshop that we can work in again. Still trying to rain here. So I got my welding bench back. It was getting really messy, just full of tools and stuff, so nice to get that on top. The body's now in the fab area. Now, as soon as we have a fine day, this is all going to get coloured out. We need to colour and paint out the underside. Nose cone's just sitting there temporarily. Once we get the underside coloured up, we can spin it upside down and sit it down on that jig frame. This is a little one, my old school one. And we're going to be building 2 bomber seats and finishing out the dash panel. So that's what's happening on the next episode. We're going to be getting this body and a pair of chairs matched up, ready to go. Then that's going to get some colour. Beam axle sitting here. That's ready for colour as well. Just got to wait for a bit of primer. And now we've got the chassis set down in place, as you've seen in the time lapse. Bit of a journey, but this is pretty much where it's going to stay from now on in. What this gives us the opportunity to do is I can now hang the front leaf springs and I can mount the beam, put all the hardware on, get this car on its wheels. We can go back to doing the rear one, which we were going to do this morning, which we ran out of time for because we had to shuffle this stuff around. So I'm going to be resetting that and doing that as I go. I'll capture some the pictures of it. And then I can mount the diff center, tail shaft, gearbox, so on and so forth. But we now got it set up in place, so that's the main thing. So, body, chassis,
And this is the motor at the moment. And you might see she's missing a few bits. She's covers her off. Turns out I had a bent push rod, so I didn't want to turn over. So I'm just doing a little bit of recovery work on that. I had some sticky lifters and they were just jammed up in there, a bit gummed up with old oil. So we've given that a clean up. They're all free now. Just got to replace that bent push rod, put it all back together, reset the tappets. Then we're just about ready to do a compression test. But it spins over now. We'll get back to that. Like I said in the first part, we need to do those 3 components to find out if this motor's worthy. I do have a plan C and plan D, but I'd like to try to get this one going. So we're getting ever closer to kicking this one in the guts, and we will. I'm pretty confident this one will go, but that in due course. So we'll get to there as we go. That's like a work in progress. So after all of that, folks, I think we're ready to restart work on the chassis. First step, let's get those leaf springs done. Okay folks, it's been a day of reset. Not only am I packing a cold, trying to solve problems, we've taken the time to relocate the chassis, which is exactly where we want to be. Had to do it eventually, but I'm looking at these spring sets here. These are out of a 35 Chef. This is a 28 chassis. I can see that the curvature of that leaf spring is way too deep. By the time you have a diff goes between these two here, this thing's going to be looking like a 4-wheel drive. Now the ground clearance on Jack's car was pretty low, and the only images I've got of the spring work is in the front end, and the front end springs are very flat. There's not much curl on them at all. So my guess is the 28 springs are a flatter spring and a little bit lower to the ground. By the time I put this spring in here and then get the angle up to the gearbox, it's going to be a really steep angle. I can lower the back of the motor down a little bit, but there's a fine line between lowering that down and getting that angle right. I think I'm wasting my time with these springs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to salvage the hangers because they're quite nice and I like the fact that they'll weld on really sweet. We're going to save those. We've done the recovery work on our rears, but these 2 springs I'm going to pull out, just put in the stock for another day, another project. And in the meantime, I'm going to go and find another set of flatter springs off to the parts shed, dig through all the leaf springs and find a better pack. Meantime, we can get a few other bits and pieces done though, so that's the main thing. We need to get that sorted. So what we can do now is we can concentrate on the pedal setup up here. I can do a few more bits and pieces up front. But yeah, that sort of stalled us out a little bit. So until I get new spring sets, I think we've got a bit of a stump. So I'm going to leave that for now until I solve that problem and move on to the other parts on the car. Well folks, that's another episode of Thommo's Tin Shed. I'm going to leave it right here. We've got a few roadblocks in the driveline. As you've sort of realised, the leaf springs aren't right for the car. And until we get the right leaf springs in, there's no point in making any adjustments to the angle or the incline of the engine. Cross member obviously needs to be final, but we need to know what position that is when the car's done. So there's a few things that just has to be put on holding pattern right now until we get that solved. That's okay. Kind of goes with the territory. When you're building a car from the ground up and you don't have everything, you are going to have these little moments, these little frustrating moments, and all it requires is a bit of deep breath, assess the situation, solve the problem, and that's what we're going to do during the week. We'll get that organised and we'll hit the ground running again next week with all the things that we need. And we also, as you realise, we're getting very close to colour work on the bodywork, which we're going to be doing, as I've said, the underside of the body. I'm pointing that way because that's where the body is. And while we're at it, we're going to do the chassis rail. We're going to paint that out as well. I only have 2 more brackets to weld into the chassis, and then the chassis is completely done. Paint time after that. So I'm going to combine that moment. When I'm painting the underside of the body, I'm going to paint the chassis. Then we have the chassis sitting on the stumps ready to go, coloured up, ready for final fits, which is sort of where it needs to be in place.
So thanks for watching. Thanks for being part of it. Thanks to the subscribers who have jumped on board just recently. Really appreciate it. Stay with the journey because we're going to take you all the way to Perco. I think we're about 4 weeks out, so it's cooking along. But next week's episode, we're going to be doing the bomber seats. We're going to finally out a pair of bespoke bomber seats and the dash panel. Last piece of fabrication. Then after that, it's just paint, dress, fit. Big push towards the end. So, again, thanks for sticking around. Don't forget, hit like, subscribe, hit those notifications, and we'll see you on another episode of Thommo's Tin Shed. But in the meantime, stay cool, stay safe, and we'll see you around.